Yo, what's up? Let's talk about boss music. If you've been listening to any of my stuff, it's no secret that I am obsessed with writing epic boss tracks. I don't know, there's just something about it that hits different. And when things just start coming together, it really starts feeling larger than life in headphones and speakers, you know? So, in this video, I wanted to go through how I composed some recent boss music and just talk about why I like the stuff in general. In the background here is the footage of me writing my recent huge suite of evil boss music. It's sped up a lot because I just went ham and there's a lot of footage. Not to sound too braggy, but damn, I was really cooking with this one. I always enjoy my music work, but I haven't had this much fun on a session in quite some time. I just kept adding and adding and adding until the thing was like 11 minutes long. If you haven't listened to the full suite, I'll link it below, and I'd really love it if you checked it out because I really put my whole soul into it. Which doesn't sound too good because it's a bunch of evil music, but you know what I mean. It's actually been requested for a while that I write some more villainous themes for my little characters, and well, the only reason it took me so long was because I wanted to do it right, you know? And I'm also a huge fan of that trope where you take all the main characters in something and make them evil and edgy in like an alternate universe. So this is going to be my take on that. And damn, this thing ended up being a blast. I ended up writing each of my 8 characters a motif, then combining them all into this huge super suite. And then I was just so excited about it, I ended up doing a bunch of drawings to go with it, and I spent a lot of time on this. So now that you know what's up, let's talk about some of my thoughts for this mega suite. And I'll start by playing you some of the first movement, we'll call it. As someone who lives in the West but enjoys a lot of music from the East, I've studied and encountered a lot of really interesting trends in composition. And well, obviously not every score from either is always like this, but I tend to notice Western scores using low choirs and like a rising tension, while the East has a lot of like younger choirs and a much colder vibe. Like in the West, we have the classic Duel of the Fates, for example, which has this huge dark choir just going ham for the lava battle it accompanies. Meanwhile, I notice music from something like Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind, for example, has a much smaller, like a child choir in some tracks, giving it a much more chilly sound. Does that make any sense? To me, Western choirs feel like descending into hell, where Eastern choirs sound like they're bringing back haunting memories. But then again, there's stuff like Dark Souls, which totally breaks that mold altogether. I don't know, I just think there's some really interesting differences and styles to be found there. But speaking of Dark Souls, that ended up being one of my main inspirations for writing these themes. That and Bravely Default, since I just finished a playthrough of the series. And maybe, just maybe, this whole thing was just an excuse for me to talk about Bravely Default, because holy crap, does its music go so hard. I played the first game in the series for the first time earlier this year, and I loved it. And I thought the music was, nice too. Nice JRPG music. As I kept playing, the music grew on me more and more, but after the game's insane, incredible final act, I was like, holy crap, dude, that was an experience. And I loved it, and I loved the music. I was so hooked on the job system in the game and I was so proud of the plays I was using. I love turn-based games that are really complex when you understand it all and you just feel like a freaking genius, you know? My heart was racing though because I really didn't want to die. Whenever I'm in these really cinematic boss fights, I'm usually more worried about dying to disrupt the story rather than waste items or lives. Luckily, I beat this one all on my first attempt with my team composition. Anyway, I remember reading the end credits and I saw Revo as the composer, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I know him from, like, Attack on Titan. And then it starts listing all the musicians that perform the music. And I don't know why this surprised me so much. I guess I was expecting it all to be digital, but I immediately had so much more interest in the score after seeing that. That was months ago now, and since then I've had all the soundtracks on loop and I've played the whole series. Just can't get enough of it, the music and the games. It came out at just the right era to be one of those perfect anime RPGs that I love, and I get to play it on my 3DS. And dude, I love the 3DS and the DS. Any games that's good that I can play on those is double good. That whole era of gaming is just extra good, and all the devices and gadgets that came with it. Bravely Default and Revo's work definitely had a huge impact on this score, and I've been getting a lot of ideas from that stuff lately. Do you ever get really into a series and you just want to listen to its music just because it's from that series? Like, I found myself looking up all kinds of variations of it, like Bravely Default Relaxing or Lo-Fi, or Bravely Default Battle Mix to grind to. Even the chill stuff isn't super different from any other chill game tracks, but I just want it to be in the vibes of the series I'm into, you know? I do that with everything, and these phases go on for months. But it's great, because my YouTube recommended is just this glorious spread of anime and game music because of it. But relating it all back to my music I'm writing here, if you're familiar with any of the Bravely Default soundtrack, you might hear some inspiration from it all throughout. Honestly, having this stuff on constant loop really shaped the vibe of these themes. If I had to describe my thought process for how I wanted this to all sound, it would be probably something like, pretend I'm Revo and create the vibes of Bravely Default, but also lots of Dark Souls because I spammed choirs, but like Pokemon too, but also sophisticated like film scores, but add anime coolness and even more choirs because I'm just extra like that. Yep, that sums it up. The final theme from the first game is called Serpent Eating the Horizon, and that's what really got the gears turning for this track. And I kept going back to it throughout making this whole thing. While I think the first movement of this really has the similar air to that theme, the second part returns to much more of my usual formula, loop and build-wise. I actually really like it a lot. I wanted to have 8 distinct sections for each of my 8 little characters, but I didn't want to have any restriction of writing to a particular character, if that makes sense. I feel like with a track as massive as this, you got to leave a little freedom or it'll just sneak up on you. So what I ended up doing was going ham and writing 8 parts however I wanted, and then went in later to assign what characters they'd be for, by adding their signature instruments over top. I think this was definitely the right call and kept things really fun for me. And by the end of this footage, you'll see just how much of a behemoth this session became. When things get big, it has to be fun, or else it's just yuck. Anyway, when I transitioned to the third part, I played it pretty easy and went into a sinister, dark ambient mode. This part was a much needed breather for me, being much simpler to write, as well as the listener. Whenever writing music, I would always have parts of high and low intensity. Since the rest of this track is crazy complex, something simple is nice for not exhausting the listener. Actually, you may notice in most of my music, I'll have a bar or two of silence between sections. When writing, I label these as pinches. A funny story about this actually. I've always included these for the same reasons I just mentioned, as well as serving as a Nice transition. But what my professors in school thought was interesting was that these pinches came in the form of additional bars to the track. So I'd have 32 bars of an A section, for example, then 1 to 2 bars of silence, then go into 16 or so bars of a B section. However, most of my peers were into writing EDM, some of them being DJs. My Ableton professor was also one of them, and he did live sound and DJing at a venue. The reason I bring this up is because I guess the sections of bars are all relevant to the drops for DJs and how they time their mixes. And as a classical musician, I had no clue. So when we were presenting our EDM tracks, my bros would have their 32 bar sections, but the last bar of it would be a pinch before the drop. So 31 bars of music, then quiet. So when it was my turn, everyone was getting ready for the drop, and they're all getting their heads ready to start headbanging, but it was a bar later than they were all subconsciously used to. It was really funny because none of us really knew what was up there, and my professor thought it was hilarious. We started calling this the Sam drop, and a few of the bros started using it in their own beats. My professor was like, "No, stop, Sam, you're messing up the mix with your film score influence." Good times. We had all kinds of little sayings like that. But yeah, I love those little bar breathers. I use them in probably every track I write. The third section is pretty ominous and overall simple. I think it really sounds neat for a shadow lurking in the darkness. I have a lot of echo and dampening on the mallet percussion here, so it sounds really distant. But of course, the choirs slowly started coming back, and the whole thing served as a really smooth transition, I think, into the next movement. I wasn't kidding earlier when I said I went ham with choirs. EQing them was crazy. While I don't have much desire to write songs with vocals, I really love the ahs of big choirs. I think it's really cool that some people can use themselves as an instrument by singing in a choir. I can play piano, but I need a piano to do so. These guys can just go, ah. I think the versatility of the choir and that human element can really elevate a score. In this case, I think it takes a bunch of video game sounding loops I wrote and enhances it to something you'd hear in a classic film, which is actually quite literally what the choirs are doing in this track. Pretty much every section of this suite has a choir element. I think it's kind of cool how well it sets the tone. They're mostly playing these huge chords over top of everything, some of which are actually really beautiful chords. Like, if I were playing the same thing on a piano, it would be really ethereal and cool. But since it's more like the tortured souls of hell, even the gorgeous augmented ninths I'm playing sound evil. I think that's so interesting. Not to mention that a lot of the chords the choir plays are actually all quite similar to each other. Most of this suite ended up being kinda in B minor with a few sections in G minor, but it may or may not even come across that way since I have accidentals all over the place. I think that also really is perfect for boss music, you know? Kinda makes it more twisted. But while I love all these choirs, and I think they kinda carry the suite, they're all still supporting the rest of the tracks in the track. This is what the fourth section ended up sounding like. I actually wasn't overly enthusiastic about this part until I later added the drums. In particular, I think it was the first fill of the section that made it actually start coming together. I actually drew a lot of inspiration from Bravely Second, the sequel game of Bravely Default, its final boss music for this part. It's done by a different composer, but I still love it. I feel like as a result, it still has a semblance of sophistication of the other sections, but has a much more epic anime sound to it. But again, it could just be that drum fill. But what I really like about this section is that it's kind of like a setup for the next, as the choir chords stay the same, and another cool fill brings us to the fifth movement. Over time, I'm really starting to resonate with electric guitar being a really cool sound of boss vibes. Even though a guitar is a string instrument, a perfectly legitimate one at that, I've always struggled to view it as it's not part of the, the classic symphony. Or who knows, maybe I'm just salty because guitar doesn't make much sense to me. But this suite is a celebration of all things epic boss vibes, so I was gonna try it. And plus, it's hella chaotic, incorporating all these things, which I think makes even more epic symbolism. Anyway, here comes the electric guitar section. So yeah, that's what it sounds like. Also equally being carried by some cool fills and drums. I always end up turning down my guitars a lot because they're just so different from the rest of my usual instruments. I was really hoping to get more of that gritty sound, but it's a bit tricky when playing it on piano. I always think real guitar parts sound so cool and complex when they shred, but I have a hard time recreating that energy on piano. So this was my best attempt. I was able to get a little slide at the end, and I think that's a nice little bit of ear candy. This whole section with the electric guitar is pretty hyper, so I have another big evil choir bit before the guitar comes back and repeats. Damn, so many video games actually use guitars in their boss music, and it just sorta has always faded to the side for me. But yo, bass parts, bro? Dude, the licks are honestly so sick. Once we started learning more about mixing and recording guitars in school, I slowly began developing more of an ear for them across all kinds of music. It's always really funny to me when I can identify this really obscure parts of music for people, and then someone asks me about guitars and basses, and I'm like, lol, what? I also love hearing things like ukulele or those Spanish guitars in boss music. I love those dark tango, type vibes. Totally goes with bosses that have masks or something, or they're twist villains. Especially if there's castanets to go with it. I really like boss music, if you can't tell. Battles just have an infinite amount of variables to write music to. So I think that's why I enjoyed this so much. But with a cool airlock sound effect, this suite transitions into the 6th movement, which I think ended up being my favorite of the whole thing. Now we're entering the world of being inspired by Pokemon Black and White. Or, more specifically, the battle theme for Getsis. At this point in writing, I had noticed I didn't have the insane amount of timpani like I should. So I played around on a timpani track, and I was like, wait a sec, I know this vibe. Played a bit more, and suddenly, it hit me. Getsis. Dennis. And that just made the whole section. Oh man, what a fantastic theme for a Pokemon villain. Oh, I love Pokemon, dude. Pokemon Black was my very first game, so its music is especially nostalgic for me. Whenever I'm doing any cooking or cleaning at home, I've usually got the typical Black and White nostalgic playlist in the background. Like, bro, the Dreamyard theme, Nimbasa City, Route 10, oh, and the remix in Smash, Chef's Kiss. I think overall my favorite theme is for when you fight Team Plasma. I really like the grunt theme, and I'd always play it when I'd film little movies as a kid with all my stuffies. And if you're wondering, I choose Oshawott every time. I've played through Gen 5 and most of the gens over and over again, and each time I trade over all my original crew from my first childhood save files. They might as well be real people at this point because I'm so attached to them. Them, as well as my Chikorita partner from Explorers of Sky, which is hands down my favorite video game of all time, with every track it's got being a masterpiece to me. I love every Gen 5 Pokemon with my whole heart. I love most Pokemon actually, but I stopped buying the newer games and I mostly just replayed the old ones because they're just perfect to me. You know how instead of watching a new show, you just go back and rewatch your old favorite every time? Yeah, that's me with Pokemon now. The last new Pokemon game I bought was Legends Arceus back in 2022. And only because my high school best friend and I were both struck with some serious corona and couldn't go to school. So, while sounding like actual death, we just played the game together all day on a Discord call and had a great time. But I haven't really touched it since. I feel like it was so enjoyable because of the circumstances, and that I could catch Shaman for free. But I also did a playthrough of Pearl version to balance it all out. The older games are peak. Oh, and you know those YouTube videos like Gen 5 music hits different, or when the Gen 4 music hits? Yeah, I think I've watched every single one of those by now. I adore them all. You know how it's like Gen 3, trumpets, Gen 4, piano, Gen 5, America. Or bro, when I hear that PMD or Battle Revolution music, I'm instantly and truly surrounded by beauty. The Pokemon composers just never stop cooking. Oh, you know what? I know this video is about boss music. I hope you don't mind me going on all these tangents. It seems that most of you also like video games, and you either play them or develop them, so I hope you still enjoy this video. But maybe I should bring this all back to writing this music. Getsu's theme is full of timpani and really twisted instruments that perfectly showcase how he has no good trainer qualities towards his mons. Like his Hydreigon uses full power frustration, and you can feel it in the music. And that's sort of what I wanted to write here. Listen. And then it goes from that into this, which I'm obsessed with. This one just sounds like pure hatred, and it just came together so easily. It really gets me hyped, you know? I love it so much. I wanted the drawing for this section to just be just right, and I ended up redoing it like 3 times. But now, it's all perfect, and it sounds like this fast-paced storm of evil. I just adore those types of vibes in boss themes. I feel like they're just like this one-size-fits-all, and there are so many ways you can interpret those vibes for whatever the music is for. It also makes the best music for when you're doing something hardcore, like studying or you're in a rush. But for me, it's also super motivating, and it makes me just want to get stuff done and get it done fast. Actually, let me tell you a little story. When I'm not writing music for stuff, I work in a coffee shop full-time, just as my normal 9-to-5 job. Only a couple of us work there at a time, so I'm usually alone for a good chunk of the day, including when I'm closing the cafe. Running a cafe for hours and then closing and cleaning it up totally alone can be a bit much sometimes, but there is one small thing I can look forward to once I lock the doors, and that's that I can play whatever music I want on the speakers while I work. I only have an hour or so to get everything done from when the store closes to when I leave, so I'm usually on quite the grind, especially since I was also doing all the customers alone until then. But bro, when my epic gamer music starts blaring, I am dialed in. Especially since it's just normal and chill music that plays all day while we're open, just puts me in the ultimate grind mode. Anyway, one day when I was cleaning the espresso machine after close, a guy comes in asking for a coffee, which was really weird because I thought I locked the doors, but I guess I hadn't clicked it all the way or something. But as soon as he came in, I was scrambling to pause the music. I explained that I unfortunately could not because I'd already taken all the machines apart, but I could get him some water, which I did, and I sent him on his merry way. What was even weirder was that later, when I was counting the cash, another guy got in. Like, damn, door 2, me 0. Since I was counting numbers in my head, I didn't rush to shut off the music, but apologized to the guy that I couldn't make him a coffee. But the guy just smiles and he shakes his head and he's like, "Nah, bro. I was just in the area and I heard loud Bravely Default music coming from here and I just had to investigate." Oh my god. That just made my whole day. Turns out he worked at this pawn shop nearby that sold old games, and he was a really avid gamer like me. Really cool series of events, and I've gotten a few cool games from his place now. So, see gamers? We don't need to touch grass. We just need to blast fantastic weeb music and the friends will come to us. But low-key, moments like this make my long barista days feel so worthwhile. The job definitely keeps me super motivated to try and make being a composer work full-time. Anyway, getting back to this suite. Again, this movement finishes up with a brief pause before another choir bit takes us to the next. There are some much higher voices in this one since I wanted it to be somewhat angelic, but like a dark angel. Love oxymorons. While I didn't have any character in mind when initially writing these movements, I was like, okay, we're 9 minutes in now, I think it's about time to throw in some majestic elements for my green girl. But I didn't want it all to just be beautiful and nice, since, it's evil time. So I tried my best to combine really beautiful choir and flute elements with just pure chaos. Take a listen. This all plays before repeating a much more distorted version of the intro. I had to really stop myself from doing a boss theme trope here. Going back to the trends of East and West, this is definitely something I notice way more frequently in Japanese games. And that is the trend of having the boss theme or part played gently by a piano or music box or something. Like it'll play normally all bombastic, and then it'll slow down to this softer version. I think this works exceptionally well when showcasing a bad guy's tragic backstory or cause for their ambitions, while also making the listener way more attached to the arc through the music. There was a particular moment in Bravely Second that did this that I really liked. It's such a cool progression of music, and even more importantly, very nice to listen to. However, I didn't want to do that in this suite because I just wanted to keep going ham, I also find once I write calmer parts, the track's duration gets way longer, and I was aiming for about 1:15-ish for each section. So yeah, kept up the energy with as much elegance as a evil maiden can have, and I think it sounded cool. Hopefully you're not tired of me fangirling over Bravely Default yet. I strongly recommend doing yourself a solid and giving some of its tracks a listen if you haven't.
Oh yeah, and real quick, I wanted to shine some light on a special sample in this project. While all my samples come from my usual endless abyss of sounds, the one I used as a final transition is a unique one that I asked a friend for. That friend being my awesome childhood friend who is also a voice actress. I had the idea for this part even before I got to this point in the production, that being the classic evil anime laugh. One of those awesome cackles that anime antagonists do. At first, I tried to record myself doing an evil laugh, but I guess it's just not my scene because I just ended up having a coughing fit. Luckily for me, I've got a voice actress best friend who delivered. She sent me a whole bunch to choose from, and I spliced it in. Very dark and subtle, but also so right. I love it. She killed it. And I admire the skill to just pull it off because I could not. Originally, I was thinking something way more cackly, like way more psychotic, but I ended up going with the more subtle version. And for a reference, I had sent her some clips of Lelouch laughing from Code Geass, and damn, she delivered. So, thank you again. I think her evil laugh synced up even better once I started editing the visuals for the final video as well. Just very happy with the whole thing. It's like the cherry on top. Which finally brings us into the last movement of this gigantic suite. I knew this one had to go even bigger since it's the last part. So I wrote out a bunch of string parts loaded with accidentals before doing anything with choirs. I'd say this section follows my little rule of bar loops a bit less than normal, and then I just did whatever I wanted with the choirs at the end. I think this makes it sound a little less predictable, but still enough of a pattern that listeners don't get lost and wonder what's happening.
Does anyone else find that different levels of evil can be written with choirs, holding a note versus just going like, ah, ah? I definitely do. And I think the combination and contrast of the two is just so epic. Why don't we give a listen to this last section? For me, when it comes to any genre of music, I have a way of mentally breaking down if it sounds like a game, movie, or standalone piece of music. And at the moment, I'm having a really hard time trying to verbalize those qualities because it's just kind of something that goes on in my head. Movie music is definitely the most in-depth to me and super sophisticated. I guess it has to have that feeling of me watching movies in the IMAX as a kid. And not gonna lie, it's gonna be most of the John Williams stuff from my childhood. Movie music is elite, and the colors in my head are always sorta swirling, if that makes sense. Video game music is super video gamey. Lots of set loops, often fast or purposely chill. It's the stuff that makes you go, oh yeah, that sounds like a video game. This stuff probably goes the hardest though, no cap. And then there's the stuff that's just its own thing, just like music written for the sake of being music. I usually lump a lot of anime tracks into this group, since I find when watching anime, the music will usually play out the same way every time, as if it's written and then added to the visuals, rather than in sync with it, but there's always exceptions, of course. Composer goddess Yuki Kijara is everywhere for this one. Bro, I swear, she is incapable of writing a soundtrack that isn't perfection. Oh, you know what? And Joe Hisaishi too. Music that's just a freaking experience all on its own. You know what I mean? Anyway, I bring all these personal mental differences up because I think this last movement really tapped more into a combination of the three. Inspiration from anime, games, with the maturity of film, and bam, it sounds fire. The accidentals, once again, are very helpful too. Once I had most of the stuff written for everything, I started going back and assigning movements to characters and polishing things up a bit. Adding in 10 trillion samples also really helped level up this composition. Definitely one of my most ambitious sessions in a minute. It was also around this time in production that I started all the drawings. And damn, there ended up being many. I didn't do any of them in a particular order. I just tried to be loose and not put any pressure on myself. Because, again, a project like this can go from fun to stressful if you don't let yourself be free. You feel me? But the drawings ended up being super fun too. I love excluding the white part of anime eyes to make the expressions look so cool. And once things started to wrap up, it was mixin' time, which was crazy. There was so much going on, holy crap. I pretty much planned everything in advance before using the speakers, as to not blow up my apartment with epic evil choirs. I've never gotten a single noise complaint, and I have no clue if anyone beside me can hear anything at all, but I know the pain of having noisy neighbors and roomies all too well, so I always try to be extra cautious. With this session, I did it like midday on my day off to ensure it'd be as least disruptive as possible. Maybe I'm thinking about it too much. I've never had any trouble. Maybe we have just really good walls. And yeah, this was an awesome project, like I said. The most fun I've had on music in a long time. But I'm also glad that with this video, I'm wrapping this one up. This whole thing has been in the works forever. I think I started this like a month ago, maybe more. I don't even remember, damn, that's crazy. Writing, recording, drawing, and planning this video, most of that happening on my breaks at work. So knowing all that, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. And also check out the full version of the suite, which should already be uploaded on the channel. I worked really hard on it, and I'm really happy with it. I've been watching this footage for a while now, as I'm doing this voiceover. Looks like this one is going to be a bit longer than usual. Oh well. I know I went on a lot of tangents, but I guess that makes it more like we're hanging out and making music. And I really like music. Can you tell? Keeping it chill, keeping it casual. Anyway, I think that'll do it for this one. Thanks again so much for watching, guys, and peace out. Cheers! And there we go. Finally done. Oh, that feels good. Wait a sec. Bro. How did I go this entire video without talking about Toho music? I guess that'll just have to be the next one.